Good morning and welcome. My name is Marilyn Shannon, and this is SkyWire, and this is where we come together and we explore the profoundness of listening. And this week our topic is about our stories and listening for them, listening to them, listening to piece them together, and they tell us something. It's like a tapestry. And listening to each other and sharing them is amazing. So I wanted to introduce who our lovely panel are down, and then we're going to go into some information about stories and how they've impacted us personally. So would you each share a little bit about yourself so that everyone out there knows a little bit of your story? So I'm going to start with Elaine. Hello, Elaine.
Good morning, everybody. Hi, I'm Elaine Nieberding from Bel Air, Maryland. Some of you know me as a ho-ho holistic nurse and a ho-ho holistic hangout hostess. And my work is about helping people find their inner lover, laugher, and leader.
Perfect. Well, that tells you something about Elaine, doesn't it? Now, Gail, what about you?
Thanks, Marilyn. It's great to be here. I'm Gail Harris, everybody, and I'm a professional writer and author, and I specialize in writing books for others. And I have a memoir coming out in October that I co-wrote that will just knock you over, and I'm actually be talking about that a little bit today because it was an incredible story to write this story, so I will be sharing about that. Thanks.
Cool. That will be a great story. And George, the only man on our panel. George, who are you?
Good morning. I am George E. Green. I am the founder and CEO of the Mindfulness Advantage. I teach and train people how through mindfulness to listen and feel into their stories so they can become the author and authority of their new story. What I'll be sharing today is, in the terms of writing, I'm writing a book called The Prayers for the Beloved, Conversations with My Heart. And so the process of mindfulness is also deepening and returning to our relationship with our hearts. And that'll be part of what I share today.
Cool. That'll be a great one. I'm all ears. And Katrina, what about you? Tell us about you.
Hi there, my name is Katrina. I'm both a writer and a creativity consultant, and I'm very passionate about helping people identify those parts of their life where they're blocked in terms of their creativity or just their passion in life, and really help them work through those. My blog is creativekatrina.com, so I kind of give people tips on a regular basis about how to do that with some simple mindful practices. And I'm excited to be here today.
Cool. Thank you. And Miss Tracy, story time.
My favorite. I love story time. And as I was getting ready for this week, my book club just finished reading The Untethered Soul. So I'm really concentrating on the stories we tell ourselves and how to go beyond the story that we tell ourselves so that we can reach our full potential, change our story. And a couple of posts, I don't know if it was George that posted or one of us others, that said, be the hero in your own story, or heroine, as it were, and how we can change that story in our heads so that we can be our own hero. And then, of course, the hero to others. So I can't wait to get into the conversation, Marilyn. Thanks for having me.
Tracy, thanks for being here, and you said something really important about being able to change our story, and that's something as we get into this, is really important to keep in mind. We are the writer of our story, and we can change it anytime we want and create a whole new story. We add to it, take away, embellish it, do whatever we want. It's our story. So I appreciate you being here too, Tracy. And Heidi's back. So Heidi, tell us a little bit about you.
Okay, I have a bit of difficulty to come here, but yeah, I'm Heidi. I'm a transformational coach and a retreat leader and cruise leader and whatever. Also a farmer, an ex-farmer, and you know, I'm very interested in exploring ways of life and in human consciousness. And as we talk about stories, I'm getting aware that my life is made of stories, which I didn't feel when I was still inside the drama. But now I really can appreciate it. And
Really?
I might have to share something. And I hope I will stay in, hopefully. Okay.
Yeah. Well, if you keep going out, just come back in. The door is always open.
Thank you.
So you're welcome. And she just said something really interesting, too, because sometimes when you're inside the drama, you can't see it. But it's part of the drama. But the drama is so important. In listening to the drama and not resisting the drama, because that's when the drama gets to be out of hand. But when we don't resist it, when we kind of welcome it, it becomes part of our story, and doesn't have that same bite and uncomfortableness. And I also want to mention that Sheila is in our comment stream. We love Sheila. She's fabulous. She is like, I would say Sheila is like a producer. She helps things keep rolling, and she's wonderful. And she does online trainings. And Sheila, if I'm wrong, correct me, but you do online real estate training. And she is magnificent. So I want to thank her for being here and doing what she does. And I am a life and business coach. I get to work with women, men, children, couples, businesses of all shapes and sizes. And I also am the co-founder of a group of women's networking events, weekly meetings and different kinds of things in several different states. And I also have another online talk show called Breaking Free, which is on Mondays. So I've always been, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say I've always been, but I certainly got attracted to stories about 11 or 12 years ago, and I believe that everything I do to this moment is about bringing out those stories. And I'm about helping people experience their freedom, build their life to be as freeing as possible, businesses to be as freeing as possible, you know, children to experience being able to express themselves. And about, I don't know, maybe 11 or 12 years ago, I was listening to Oprah, and she had a couple of guests on, and I was like just enthralled with what I was listening to. They were sharing their stories. And they weren't calling it like, what stories weren't as popular then as they are now. And I was listening to this woman she was talking about sitting on the floor with her children, and they were wearing those Crocs, those shoes that have all the holes in them. And they were just playing on the floor. They were little kids, and they were sticking things into the shoes. And they wore them to school, and everybody wanted to buy them. Everybody wanted to know what they were. So she created this huge company over this, huge. And then this other woman came on who was a single mom, and in order to feed her children, she created a company and became a multi-millionaire with this. And I was like, I was learning so much from listening to them share their stories. It was giving me like, I don't know, like a push to do something for my personal life. And I wasn't sure. I was a mediator and doing all those things, but it was something more. And I just realized, I started telling people about these stories and how amazing it was. And I realized how much people loved listening to me share these stories. And at this time, I was involved with doing some work with people using a talking stick. And I'm not sure if any of all of you know what a talking stick is, but it's a Native American culture. And what they do is, the tribal leader will take a stick and dress it up with things that have meaning to him or to members of his tribe. And they use it in their council meetings. They use it to resolve conflicts. They use it to, to open up and talk. And they teach their children from the age of 3 how to listen. Because when you have the stick, you get to talk. When you pass the stick, to the next person, they talk. Everybody else has to listen. And in your hand, you're holding these magnificent things, this history, these things that have meaning. And I was amazed with people share, they would share and then they would pass it to the next one. So I decided to create a newsletter called The Talking Stick. And I thought I would go to everybody. Everybody has a story. Everybody has a story. And I would ask just regular, everyday people to share something about their story. So the first one I did, I had this woman writing a story. Everybody wrote their own. It would be 2 or 3 at a time. And she shared a story about her daughter, who was about 6 years old. And the story was called The Worry Kid, because this kid was full of stress and worry, full. And she drew pictures in my newsletter, and she did all these things. And somebody else I knew, I didn't know, she had been raped multiple times. So she shared about her story. And it took me hours to push the button to share this newsletter. It was the first thing I had ever done like this, and I was petrified. My finger would go to the button to publish, and I couldn't do it. And then I would try it again, and I still couldn't do it. And but I had to. I had to pass these stories around so people could see what people were doing, how they were handling life, what they were doing. So I eventually pushed the button, and I sent this newsletter out into the ether. I had a mailing list of thousands of people, and each of these people that wrote in my newsletter passed their story. And my heart was beating like a hammer, because here I was, opened myself up to all of this. And the next morning, I went into the coffee shop, local coffee shop here, and there was one of the women who had written a story about her child. And I was petrified to meet her face to face. And I went over to her and she said, "Marilyn, thank you." I said, "For what?" She said, "Because nobody in my family knew what I was going through. They had no idea what my child was going through. But through the words, they were able to understand." And in that moment, I realized it wasn't about me. It was about her. It was about her story.
Okay, Marilyn just dropped out, so we'll just pick up and keep our stories going. And what an amazing story she just told of being nervous and being afraid to put something out there that you have no idea what it's going to do when it hits the world, when it hits her email list and all of her contacts. But so many people resonate because they don't tell their stories. They're in their heads. They're living in fear of what their stories are. So fantastic inspiration of what listening and communication can do. And I don't know, Heidi, are you here and back? Would you like to start the conversation with storytelling?
Can you hear me?
Wait, I think Marilyn's back. Marilyn, are you back? Okay. Heidi.
Good. No, that was the end. I guess that's the end of what I need to say. So I'm going to turn it over. And go ahead, Tracy. What were you going to say?
I just did a quick summary and was inviting Heidi to start the conversation with her story and what she has. I know from the green room she's got a good share ready for us for today.
Yeah. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I wanted to tell you the story where I first realized the importance of the two different voices in myself and the importance to listen to one and not the other. And exactly it was when I was 31, I think. And I lived in Berlin and I was married for 12 years and I shouldn't have been married so long, actually. And I was singing, and I had quite a good career, but little. And I thought, and I knew my voice was not the one I was using there, that I had more potential, more possibilities. And so I decided to go to study in Italy for a year, I thought, And I knew somehow that this would be the end of the marriage. And the day before I went away, first to do a language course and so on, but there was something really in my gut. I knew this was a decisive step. And the day before we went into a theater, and during the play I felt bronchitis come up. You know, I began to cough and I began to have fever, and the whole body told me, don't go. You have to be at home. You are sick. You cannot go away. You know, in a country you don't know the language and you don't know where to go to sleep and so on. And it was a fear reaction. And I knew that this was a voice of the resistance to growth. And I became very, very clear. And I said, you won't get me. I will go anyway. And I did go, and it was very difficult at the beginning. But this decision to not to hold back and get influenced by, you know, by obvious signs that it's not right, because when you are ill, you should go to bed and not go with the airplane in an unknown country. That this decision was right, and it has brought me here where I am now. And I'm very, very thankful that I didn't listen to this little devil who said, don't do it, because it's dangerous outside in the world. You know. This is sort of the beginning of my story to be here in Italy for now almost 30 years.
And the rest of the story is coming, right?
The rest of the story is the life has opened up. I went on my way of discovering the world, discovering myself, and all the time, you know, and now I'm able to help other people to do these steps into self-growth and self-actualization. I have found my voice. It's really, you know, it is now mine and not the reduced one I had before. I'm entering ever more into my potentials, and it began because I had the passion for the voice, but it was only the, let's say, the motor given from the universe that to go out and overcome these obstacles.
And we all have them.
We all have them.
And yeah, we all have them. And when we listen to our stories or somebody else's, we hear those obstacles, but they don't have to be a roadblock. Well, maybe they are a roadblock. Maybe we're supposed to go a different road.
Yeah, and I think what is important to know that you always have the choice. There is a choice point where you can choose to stay, you know, in the compromise as it always has been, or to go into the unknown future. And the unknown future makes a lot of fear, but you know, do it also you have the fear, because something else will come out which is much better than.
And maybe that unknown road to the future is the stories that we're getting ready to tell. That's what people can connect with, and going forward, they connect with this. I connect with your story. That's my unknown future, is listening to your story. So thank you very much for sharing that.
Thank you.
So, are there any comments yet, Tracy, or anything?
Sheila is out there keeping the conversation going. She liked that you called her a producer. What would we do without Sheila? And she's just keeping us posted with what's going on. There is apparently she says, refer to photo 3 for an example of a talking stick, thanks to Elaine. So thanks for the photo, Elaine, and we've got an example of a talking stick out there.
Yeah, I actually posted one the other day too. So,
Yay.
yeah. People can use a talking stick in any, you know, in any relationship in corporate America, in your families. I've done them with circles of kids, and you find out things about people that you might not have found out before, because when you hold these precious things in your hand, the energy of each other is in your heart, and you get to express yourself. So it is a beautiful tradition. And Elaine, I pass the stick to you. I'm on the stick now. Heidi's on the stick, and of course Tracy spoke some. So Sheila, we're all on this stick together. Now you have each of us on this stick in your heart. Now share with us at this, with this in mind, with this in your heart.
Before I begin, I want to just acknowledge, Marilyn, that your newsletter, it was like a collection, an anthology, and it's very popular today for people who want to tell their story, to write their story and include it in a collection. And sometimes that's a very comforting and good way to get their voice out there. It's just one medium. Obviously, here on Hangouts, we have another way to share our story, and we're on stage, so to speak. When I was listening to Heidi, I was noticing just the poignancy and the feeling that was coming through, and it made me recognize, as I was sitting here before being called on, I was even thinking, like, the story I'm going to tell, is it the right story? And I doubted for a minute that it was. But the story I'm going to tell today, I'll call it, remember your halo. When I was 5 years old in kindergarten, I was somehow selected to be the angel in the Christmas play and sing Silent Night. And so as this was all unfolding, I went home and I told my mother I needed an angel costume for the Christmas play. And so she made this, and it was put together. But during one of the rehearsals for this little mini production, here are the children in the kindergarten class, we're waiting backstage or at our different places. And during one of these rehearsal times, I'm 5 years old, I had to pee. I peed on the stage. It was a source of great embarrassment, I guess, as a little kid, and for years my brother chided me about it. But nonetheless, I got to sing Silent Night. Somehow, someone recognized that I would be shining, or that I could use my voice in a helpful way, this way. So I did that. My mom, of course, came to the program, enjoyed it. She was very surprised to see me out there so boldly. I'm sharing this story now because there are lots of days where I wake up or I'm in a new environment and I forget that I always have a halo. But I forget it sometimes. But that halo, that light, is really the source of my true nature and my power and my individual, sparkly self. And so it's okay to pee on the stage from time to time. You'll get over it, but always remember you got a halo to wear. And if you remember you're wearing your halo when you're meeting anyone else, as you say hello to them, no matter what drama is going on for them, you'll notice their halo too.
Wow.
Passing the stick.
Passing the stick. That was beautiful. And the image that I had was beautiful, and seeing everybody with a halo, and and helping everybody experience that they have a halo. And that, that was beautiful. Thank you very much, Elaine. And I want to just make a point of, I know that there's a gentleman that just joined in the stream, Robert Boyd, and it's ironic. I guess he saw what I posted this and about the talking stick, because one of the first things I did with the talking stick was get a group of kids together, little kids. They were 5 years old, 7 years old, and we took them out into a backyard that was gorgeous, out in like a forest, and we had them play games, and then we had them make a stick, and they sat down together and we asked them questions, and they got to express themselves holding the stick, and we got it on film. And this gentleman that's in the stream now was somebody who was there that day helping me with the kids, and he was playing games with them and helping them express themselves. So I want to welcome Bob Boyd into the stream, and it's really nice to have you there and bring up this memory. So it was very cool. So now I pass the stick to Gail.
How did you know? How did you know that that I had to do this now, that I had to speak? Elaine, I just want to say that I was so moved by your story. I'm really welled up right now, and I think it just actually has to do with the fact that I've been, I've written this story over the last 5 years, and it's actually going to be, it's a book that's going to be launched on October 7th. Finding Zoe is the title, and it's the story about, it's my co-author story. So you have to understand that I actually wrote a memoir, somebody else's memoir. I mean, it's an unusual thing, to write somebody else's story. I had to come and write this woman's story from my own perspective, how I saw her story. And it's been the most incredible experience of my life in so many different ways, writing this book. And sometimes it's hard to express why, but I think when I listened to Elaine and she told her story, it just came really clear to me. And I think it's because, when we hear other people's stories, why it's so powerful is because we learn so much about ourselves. That's what I related so much to what you say. I mean, I don't think I ever peed on a stage, but I remember one time when I was in 6th grade and I was standing in front of the classroom and my skirt was up to here. I was wearing like tights, and then the static electricity, I took off my coat, and my skirt was up to here and my underwear was showing, and it was like, it was very humiliating. But anyway, so I could relate to that from a different, a different perspective. And I just want to speak a little bit about this story. So it's the story of a woman named Brandy Raris, and she's a deaf woman, and she's a former Miss Deaf America. And originally she wanted to tell the story about her daughter Zoe's amazing adoption. Her daughter is deaf as well, and her daughter came together in the most synchronistic ways. And when we first started working on this project together, she just wanted to tell this adoption story, and she said to me that the fact that she's deaf and her daughter Zoe is deaf has nothing to do with the story. Like, it was just it turned out to be her memoir, but the last thing she wanted to do initially was be a part of the story. So, I just remained open and I listened and I started doing my interviewing. And then when I started interviewing her, and I found out who she was as a person and her whole story and who she was in relation to deaf history. I mean, she went on to become Miss Deaf America at one of the most critical times in deaf culture and deaf history. And her husband as well has played a profound role in deaf history. And it just hit me all of a sudden. I just felt like, oh my gosh, Brandy, no, the fact that you are deaf and Zoe is deaf has everything to do with the story. And it was just like the entire story changed because of this listening. It's like I realized from the listening that, no, this book is completely about something else. And I've never been deaf. A lot of people have never been deaf, but what I've learned from her story as a deaf person, it's just incredible. We can learn so much from other people, and even though they're not like us, we tend to push things away when they seem foreign to us, but when in reality they can very likely teach us a lot about who we really are.
Yeah, and Gail, that's beautiful, and you have to really put yourself in a position to ask the right questions. Even informing our own story, ask ourselves the right questions. Go through the pain. Go through the attachment to what you think how something should look, to how it looks again, and then how it looks again, and that's all part of the story. Everything is part of the story. So that was really lovely, and I am looking forward to reading this story. I love people's stories, so that's cool. So thank you very, very much, Gail, for that. George, we pass the stick to you.
Thank you, and thank everyone for their stories. It's encouraging when people have the courage to allow themselves to be heard and seen. I think that's the playground we're on today, and it's a beautiful thing. So I just want to honor and bow to everyone's courage that has already spoken, and to those that are going to speak today, as well as myself. So I am, beyond being a teacher and trainer in mindfulness, I am first and foremost a writer and a poet and a lifelong romantic. I say that lifelong rather than die hard because I believe romance is alive and living, and there's nothing about death in love and romance. So my story is I'm a student of awareness and meditation and stillness and listening, and I read a book by Daniel Odier, who is an authority on SkyWire Tantrism. That's the non-postural yoga of Tantra, not the pop culture Tantra of the Western world. His book is called Desire, the Tantric Path to Awakening, and something really struck me in this book to the point where I read this page maybe 15 or 20 times in a day to drink in. And the idea that was so profound was, in their practice of Shaivic Tantrism, their desires, their highest desires, and their fulfillment are co-resident in their hearts and their minds. They practice and live and breathe and sit in unity consciousness, and what I call union and communion all the time. And the illustration was, imagine that you were thirsty and there was a glass of clear, clean, cool spring water in front of you, and that glass of water thirsted as much for you as you did for the glass of water. I spent 30 to 40 days in an inner inquiry around the idea and the expression and the exploration of unity, of union and communion. And my sits became deeper and more profound. My exploration and then understanding of what unity means became deeper and more profound, to a moment where 40 days into this ongoing inner inquiry, quite literally, my heart was cracked open. After listening to my heart and listening from a space of not I and my, but we, our, my heart, my beloved, my God, my higher self, the cracking open was awakening to my true and essential relationship with my heart. And in that essential relationship came an essential conversation. And so on day 40, my writing began pouring out of me. And I found myself expressing myself from my heart with absolute courage and abandon. Someone talked about, is my story the right one, and doubting ourselves. We are constantly second-guessing ourselves. They're part of our inner narratives and stories are what I call either inner alignments or inner arguments. And it's our inner arguments that represent our shadow, our fear, our doubt, our grief, our sadness. And in the blazing fire and presence and relationship of ourselves with our hearts, those shadows can't exist. So for me, what was most profound was to slow everything down and rest the entirety of my attention on what matters most, which is my inner relationship, my inner conversation, my inner story with my heart, myself, my God, my beloved. And what came from that was an amazing and profound experience and sense of liberation and reunion and remembrance. From that space, as an author and a writer, I quite literally began to author and write my new story, and I continue to write my new story and our new story every day, including this morning. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
That's great. Thank you. So, in sticking to the story and changing the story, I think is something that is so important to acknowledge, and that sometimes you're going to be knocked over the head, and that's part of the story of getting up, and that's part of the story, like George is sharing. And I tell you, when I went to push that button, it was torture. I mean, I didn't push it till 10 or 11 o'clock at night, and I was waiting to push it all day long. I mean, I just couldn't. So, but that's only made me stronger, and I've been able to share that, and it's been a resting place to say, okay, Marilyn, it's not about you. So, Katrina, I pass the stick to you.
Thank you, Marilyn. You know, one thing that I really wanted to point out for all of the people that have spoken so far is that you're sharing a part of yourself, but years later, these stories are still shaping you. They're like a touchstone for you that you go back to. And that is actually what's so interesting when people are actually feeling like, well, I've written the story or I've told the story is actually still active in you. And I just kind of wanted to point that out because I think it's a really interesting thing to think about sometimes. And the reason I wanted to point that out as well is because a lot of the writing that I do is helping people to tell their story. So I'm actually along right there with them saying, okay, I'm asking them questions and helping them kind of dig into what that story means and feels like for them. So, you know, being able to collaborate with someone in that way is a very powerful thing, and it's a very wonderful thing, but I also understand more so than anything else why our stories are so powerful and shape us is because they continue to live through us all the time. As far as a quick little story that I can share from a personal experience is that there was a while back where I was a pet sitter and I had done a lot of things with animals, or animals were becoming a bigger part of my life, but I didn't actually grow up with animals. I was very allergic to animal fur, and you know, when I was younger I didn't have pets. So I was living in a townhome and I was working from home doing some writing, and there was a Rottweiler that was outside the door. And this is like, you know, just a townhome area where there's probably people have pets, but this dog wouldn't leave my front door. And, you know, as you know, Rottweilers don't necessarily have the best reputation for being friendly dogs. You don't necessarily want to let one in your house or hang out with one. But I noticed he was kind of whining and crying, and I was getting a little concerned because I'm feeling like, hey, there's an owner out there missing their dog. So I went out there and sort of, you know, just kind of calmed the dog down, and he wanted in my house. He wanted to come in my house. So the next logical step, I was like, okay, well, you seem like you're not going to bite my face off, so I guess I can let you in the house. And I called the animal control for them to come get him, but they're like, well, the dog has to be inside with you in the house for a certain amount of time before we can get there because we're afraid it'll take off before we show up. So I had to trust enough that I could let this animal in my house. And really what ended up happening is that he just kind of followed me wherever I went. If I sat at my desk, he sat with me. If I wanted to get a glass of water, he followed me. And just being able to step into that knowing of, even though I hadn't had a lot of experience with animals and I was just getting more of that this animal knew that I was the person that he needed to talk to get home. This is the animal, he just knew. And having that trust in that moment sort of helped me step into like, hey, I can totally do this. This is comfortable for me, and even though the experience is kind of new and a little scary, when you don't know an animal, we're trusting each other, and this is kind of how it's working for us. So by the end of the time that he was there, I told the animal control officer, I was like, if no one comes to claim this dog, I really think I almost want to adopt him. He was just an awesome animal. And having that connection in that moment was a really powerful story for me, because then I was allowed to change my story moving forward and how I can connect with animals, and there's just that inner knowing between us. So I wanted to share that fun little story with you guys today.
That just led me to something while you were talking, and I wonder, and I never thought about it this way, but are our stories, I guess they're just those messages from the universe, you know? That's what it's the story of the universe. You know, our story that the universe is giving us. I don't know. I throw it out to you, and maybe after Tracy shares some things, maybe that's something you want to delve into a little bit more. But that just came to me when you were saying that, because I was visualizing some of the things that happened to me, and wow, they had to be like these messages, So that was great. Tracy?
Hi.
Hi.
Wow. What fantastic inspiration from everybody. I don't think I'll ever get in a fearful situation where I have to be on stage and not remember Elaine's story. They say when you're afraid of public speaking, you're supposed to imagine your audience without their clothes on. But to get out in front of a stage, because I speak in front of people all the time, and to imagine what is the worst thing that can happen. Well, I can pee on my angel suit, but I still have a halo and have a story to tell. It's just unbelievable. Anyway, I just had to point that out, that I loved it. And the story that we tell, when I was younger, I grew up in a very small town. There's 12 in my class in high school from 4th to 11th grade. And everybody knew everything about everybody, whether the story was true or not. It was a storytelling kind of place. And the first thing I wanted to do was get out of that tiny little town in New Mexico and just be a big city girl. I had this just amazing dream of being this cosmopolitan, chic New York City, Lower East Side. I watched every movie. I read every book. That was just going to be my life. And things changed, and I ended up in Miami, which is a big city, and there was water, so I learned how to scuba dive, and my story changed at that point. And, when people who know me from back then see how I live now, and they're like, this is worse than Cloudcroft. This is smaller than Cloudcroft. You have designed and built this. And so when I was thinking about a story for today, how many of us go through our lives thinking our lives should be one way, and then we have a realization, some sort of epiphany, an aha moment that I want to rewrite my story. I had a wonderful conversation with Manny St. Victor last week, and his entire life told him to be this, and it just didn't feel right. The signs weren't there. The vibration wasn't there. He knew it wasn't going to make him happy, and he changed his story. And my conversation yesterday with Stephanie, again, investment banker, do this, do this, do this, reach that next goal, and she had the epiphany about happiness and what was going to make her happy. So when we think about who we are and what our story is, where do we find the courage to go within ourselves and change our story? Because I just, it's the most exciting part. I don't know if you know this, I'm working with George. He's teaching me how to breathe, and I know that sounds funny, but he's teaching me how to breathe. And the ability to be able to open our minds to the possibility of every single thing that's out there, that we don't have to be stuck in the story that was written for us, that we can have the courage to change our story. And I don't know, I guess that was my big planning and getting ready for this week, is how many people don't think they can change their story and don't find the courage to change their story. It's one of the things I love about Google+. You can find like-minded people that you may not be able to find in your community, your IRL, you're in real life, but you can find like-minded people to inspire you to have your story be changed. And I never thought I'd be here. I never thought I'd be doing what I'm doing, and it's the most amazing thing I've ever done. And it's all because I made the choice to change my story. And it's just wonderful inspiration that I'm getting from all of you guys today. And do you still have the Rottweiler, Katrina? Did you ever get to adopt him?
No, actually, his family was definitely looking for him. He was a beautiful dog. So he got home safe. I called a couple days later, and they said that he was back home. So
Oh,
happy ending to the story, which is good.
very happy ending. I just thought I'd see if there was a second chapter to that one.
Well, there's probably a second chapter to a lot of these. Tracy, you brought up some amazing points, and I think really important is to talk about how we change our story, how we listen to other people's stories. You know, where we are when they're talking is important. The attention we give somebody, you know, how present we are to listen to the whole story, to bring ourselves back so we can be respectful. But also, I think really so important is how we change our story, how we listen for the next piece, how we listen to grow the story, how we give ourselves permission is huge. So anybody have any thought about that they would like to share? I mean, Gail, you spoke very well about that. You know, how you came into a situation and you listened for the change, you listened for the shift. What did you hear in that shift that gave you permission?
I'm sorry, Marilyn. I actually, honestly, I just like spaced out when you were asking me the question. Can you just repeat it to me? What did you want to know?
Well, and thank you for saying that, because that happens to all of us. So this is reality. This is life right here, and this strip is life.
Yeah.
We're sitting here and we're bringing these things up, and there's no script here of, well, this is what's going to happen then, and this is what's going to happen next. So we're all at our most vulnerable, real selves. And this is how life is. And yet we can work together and support that, because that's how life is. So I appreciate that very much, Gail. So Tracy had brought up a great point about listening for the shift. You know, how do you know that, like Heidi was talking about early on, when you listen to that other voice, which voice you're listening to, and what should you do with it? You know, and how do you make your story bigger? And you brought up a story about the book, you know, and just like George, his heart had to be broken open, you know, to change his story. So what are we listening for? What are those clues? What do we hear that allows us the permission to change that story, to shift? So Gail, you know, what did you hear in your writing your book that allowed you to shift?
Well, I mean, bottom line, I just had to trust that it was like this epiphany that I was having when I was listening to Brandy tell her story and her husband tell her story. Because, again, without going into the details, they were profoundly involved in the changing of deaf history, and they led the deaf community, you know, through their struggles and on to victory. I mean, and it's all in the book. And so when Brandy had said, you know, so I started studying deaf culture and deaf history for a couple of months, and it blew me away. It was like this whole community of people out there, maybe living down my block, that I just never even knew existed before, that had this culture and history and language that was absolutely not to be believed. And when I listened to Brandy tell her story, it's like the most unbelievable story that I've ever heard in my entire life, you know. And here I was given this gift to tell this story. And when I heard her story about what it meant for her to be deaf, it was an absolute revelation.
Okay.
That's
okay.
all. And
okay,
so
that's perfect. Okay, that's perfect. George, you heard your heart break. You let yourself go to the point where your heart broke. How did you let yourself do that? What did you hear along the way that you didn't stop before your heart broke? You went to that breaking point. How did you do that? Okay, I don't hear him. Is anybody else?
He has to unmute.
George, you're on mute, babe.
Unmute.
So first and foremost, language and conscious language is very important, especially when we're telling a story. So the reality is my heart, the words I used were, my heart cracked open. It didn't break. It just opened, and I opened to my heart to the extent that I could hear the conversation, one that I was having in my head, that was drowning out the real and essential conversation that was going on in my heart. So rather than breaking, I was in a state of what I call remembrance. I was remembering who I am. I was remembering that I am my heart first and foremost. And from that deeper space and place of listening, I was able to access and hear and then express through my writing the amazing epiphanous essential conversation that we all can have with ourselves, our hearts, our God, and our own understanding, and what I call our beloved, which is a descriptor for all of those things we're talking about, ourself and God, our beloved. So it comes down to a deep state of inner listening that requires absolute courage. And the courage comes from, are you willing to surrender your distraction? Are you willing to surrender the shadow stories you have that operate all day long, that keep you in the hallucination of separation? Or are you willing to have the courage to surrender all of that and be in the unknown? And unfortunately, what the unknown is for all of us is a space and place of absolute unification and unity, the space I call our inner union and communion.
Okay. All right. That was perfect. Thank you for adding that. So it's listening to those moments, those seconds, and there's a knowingness along the way. There's a voice that's stronger than the negative voice. There's a voice that's taking your hand and saying, "Come on, this is a bigger picture. There's a connection to something else." So, Heidi, you talked about the voice. How did you know? How did you hear the difference?
I must say the voice is not very loud, this little voice who says this is the right thing, but it is persistent, and it has a different quality. It is, how to say, it is like, I try to find words for that. It is like being surrounded by safety, or I don't know what it is. It is trust. It is something with trust has to do. But it's not
Great
screaming.
point.
Yeah, it is not screaming. It's
No.
very, very, very low. But when you listen to it, you have the feeling, this is right. This is right. You know? And then you hear the other voice, and this is screaming, you shouldn't, blah, 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 blah. And this quality of the other voice is, you listen to it and you say, yeah, you are right, but I don't believe you completely. While this the other voice, you know, the guidance voice, I would call that, is trustworthy. When you listen to it, it is a different feeling. You just know that it's right. So, but you have to listen,
Yeah.
to listen, because otherwise you wouldn't hear it. So.
Right. That's right, because the head is going to be loud and in your face. The heart is quiet, and that's the journey. It's subtle. So that was a very good point. It's more powerful. It's not going to be in your face. It is subtle. It is going to be peaceful. There's an aha in there. So that was absolutely right. Perfect. Thank you for that. Elaine, how would you tell our listeners, watchers, our panel, how would you tell them, or what would you share with everyone about how to listen for that shift? Or what is the shift into building a different story, or accepting the story you have and knowing it's a good story?
I'm not going to answer your question directly. I feel compelled. Okay. I feel compelled to acknowledge the holiness of this space. I mean, I've been moved. I mean, practically tearing. I am tearing right now. we've been talking about authoring our life, getting the courage to tell our story, to create new stories. And when we look at the word author, it starts with A-U. When we look at the word A-U-M, this holy word, this word that we might chant sometime to experience unity, it's the same two letters that are representative of gold in the periodic table of elements. Gold is AU. When we touch our hearts, we touch that precious stuff, that precious gold. So if you want to be the author of your life, just as George said, you have to have that courage to touch into your heart, feel that preciousness that is right there, and then let the next moment be fully expressed, your story of the moment, and for what you're led to express with whoever you happen to be at the moment. You know, just dare to be in that courageous space, and often what may come out of your mouth may not be what your mind was thinking should come out 10 seconds before. So feel for that gold in the heart.
I want to acknowledge you for not listening to me and for going on your own path. That is most important. Thank you for that. Katrina, you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. What about you? What would you suggest?
Well, I think because she kind of took a roundabout, you're going to have to remind me of what we're focusing on again, because I know that she just told a very beautiful movie.
Okay. How do you, forget what I said. What do you want to say now about stories?
In terms of what's in your heart, there's not a right way to tell it. I think a lot of people, especially when they don't think of themselves as writers, feel as if there's a right or wrong way to write it, to tell it, to share it. And I just encourage people that whatever way feels good to you, just start doing it. And not everyone has to see it right now. Just start working with it. And the more you get familiar with your own story and comfortable with how you want to tell it, it'll just become easier, and how you want to share it in the world.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because you never know when the world's going to need that story. That's whatever story you crafted or created, or whatever story was created around you for you. You never know when you're going to need it. It's like material, like a comic uses material when they get up and they tell jokes. You never know when that's going to be necessary. So that is perfect. Mm-hmm. And what about you, Tracy? Mm-hmm. Tracy?
I'm sorry, I had to find my unmute button. I think just a repeat or a culmination of what everybody said. My book club just read The Untethered Soul a couple of months ago. Really getting to know the voice in your head. And like Heidi was describing, not the positive, encouraging voice, but get to know the naysayer that's in your head. And if you really listen to that voice, that story only brings up what you can't do. And I know for me it was an aha moment when I changed the story of that voice and really got to know that person who's in there. And I don't want to freak anybody out, but I do have voices in my head. It's a huge, big committee. And this one real mean one was the one that was holding me back. And if that was an in real life person, which is what Singer asks us to do in the book, is to take out that voice and put it as a person sitting next to you. And then you have to ask yourself, would you be friends with this person? Somebody who always put you down, somebody who never encouraged you to reach your goals. Would you be friends with that person if it was a real person? And the answer unequivocally is no. So you get to change that person's story and put her back in your head so she becomes your biggest cheerleader and not your biggest cheerleader. And you're able to really change the story in your head so that you can connect to your heart, so that you can just fulfill whatever passion that you have in place for the world. And it's just, I guess that's my kind of summation and closing, is to connect with the story that's in your head and change it to whatever your heart tells you you want to do. And those moments are inspiring.
Yes, they are, and thank you. And they are inspiring, and they're part of what we have to do in this world, is to live our life and share the story. I mean, I think that's, what we have to share our vulnerability, and when we connect with each other, just like we have here, we are sharing our humanity. We're sharing our ups, our downs, our sideways, our lefts, our hearts, our heads, our lessons, our loves, our compassions. This is where we do it. And when we do it with ourselves, we're doing the exact same thing. And so I want to thank each and every one of you for coming here today. And for, it's amazing. That's all I can say. And everybody out there that's had the pleasure of listening to this, and that will have the pleasure of listening to it, it is amazing to sit with a group of people, whether you know them or you don't, to open up yourself to them and have them open up to you and find those connections. It's amazing to be in a world, because none of us really knew each other. And now we're soulmates. So I encourage the world to do this. And with that, I honor each of you. And I look forward to next week, again, where we're going to expand this conversation of listening into realms that I don't even know about, or even can't even imagine and dream up. So with that, thank you all for being here. Thank you everyone for listening and watching. And we'll see you all very soon. Bye.